Imagine a man walking into a meeting. He is the most powerful figure in the Roman Republic, entering what he thinks is a routine session of the Senate. It's the Ides of March, 44 BCE. As the blades start landing, Caesar attempts one last act of control. According to ancient accounts, he pulls his toga over his head and tugs the fabric down so he'll fall more decently. He straightens his clothes for his own execution. He collapses in the theater of Pompey, bleeding out at the base of a statue of the very rival he had just crushed in a civil war. History rarely offers an irony this precise. This leaves us to wonder how someone who functioned as a calculated survivor for decades, a man who lived by reading his enemies, could ignore months of warnings and walk straight into a lethal trap. To understand that, we have to look at how he survived his youth. Long before he was a dictator, he was a target. When the dictator Sulla ordered him to divorce his wife, Caesar refused. He spent months on the run, stripped of his money and safety, sleeping in a different house every night with a price on his head. While fleeing to study rhetoric in Rhodes, he was captured by pirates. When they demanded a ransom, Caesar laughed at them. He told the pirates they were undervaluing him and insisted they ask for twice as much money. He was a hostage who took offense at his own price tag. During his captivity, he treated the pirates like subordinates. He ordered them to be quiet when he wanted to sleep and read his own poetry to them. He told them repeatedly and to their faces that he would crucify them the moment he was free. They thought he was joking. He wasn't. Once the ransom was paid, he raised a fleet, captured them, and kept his promise. That absolute, unwavering conviction kept Caesar alive when he was an underdog. But the same psychological patterns that bent his world eventually began to dismantle it. In his early 30s, Caesar stood before a statue of Alexander the Great in modern-day Spain and reportedly broke down in tears. Alexander had conquered the known world by that age. Caesar felt he had achieved nothing. He was measuring his life against a timeline that demanded total dominance. He converted that feeling of inadequacy into a dangerous momentum. He took on life-threatening debt to buy his way into higher political offices, including the position of high priest. He was effectively gambling his entire future on his ability to keep winning. This created a situation where failure meant total ruin. He famously told his mother that he would return from the election either as high priest or not at all. He had invested so much in his trajectory that turning back was no longer a viable option. That pressure fueled his decade-long conquest of Gaul. He wasn't just acquiring territory for Rome. He was building a legend and a fortune fast enough to stay ahead of his creditors and his political enemies. By the time he returned to the Italian border, his options had narrowed to a single point. If he surrendered his command, his opponents would use the courts to destroy him. If he kept his army, he would have to start a civil war. He paused at the Rubicon River, then chose the path of total escalation. By saying the die is cast, he made his own point of no return a physical reality. Crossing that river represents a specific psychological threshold. When a person's identity is too heavily invested in a single direction, they will often choose to break the entire system rather than admit the investment was a mistake. Beyond the battlefield, Caesar engineered spectacles to reshape the public's reality. He understood that power isn't just about what you do, but about how the story is told. When he wanted to cross the Rhine into Germany, he didn't use boats. He built a massive wooden bridge in just 10 days, marched his legions across, and then dismantled it. The bridge had no lasting tactical purpose. It was a demonstration of Roman reach that left the tribes on the other side terrified. At the siege of Alesia, he trapped the Gallic leader Vercingetorix by building two massive lines of fortifications, one to keep the enemy in and another to keep reinforcements out. This engineering feat became the centerpiece of his personal myth. He reinforced these images by writing his own history. His commentaries were written in a simple, direct style that made his version of events seem like the only objective truth, effectively silencing his critics before they could even speak. Back in Rome, he applied this control to the Republic itself, redesigning the calendar to match the sun and stamping his profile onto silver coins. He was treating the state as a machine that he, and only he, had the authority to recalibrate. The danger of relentlessly editing your own narrative is that you eventually lose the ability to see where the myth ends and the reality begins. He weaponized mercy, routinely pardoning his defeated enemies to project an image of total dominance. In a culture of elite Roman equals, being pardoned by a peer was often a source of deep humiliation. Instead of gratitude, Caesar's clemency generated a quiet, burning resentment among the very men he allowed to live. As his power grew, he began to ignore the social rituals that held Rome together. He remained seated when the Senate approached him with honors and dismissed his bodyguards, claiming that a life spent in fear was a life not worth living. This insulation from reality led him to brush aside a soothsayer's warnings and ignore his wife's nightmares about the Ides of March. He had come to believe that the rules of cause and effect no longer applied to him. When dominance is used to make others feel small, it doesn't secure loyalty. It provides the people you've humbled with the psychological permission to strike back. Inside the theater of Pompey, the assassination finally materialized. It was the culmination of a series of unchecked social and political frictions that Caesar had convinced himself he could ignore. The senators crowded him, pulling at his clothes. He fought back with a writing stylus, but the swarm was too large. He was struck 23 times before he finally collapsed. Killing the dictator failed to restore the old order. Instead, the vacuum allowed his heir, Octavian, to construct the very empire the assassins were trying to prevent. Caesar's patterns remain visible in smaller scales today. The comparison trap that drives us to chase someone else's timeline, or the refusal to leave a failing path because of how much we've already sacrificed. Extensive power acts as a lens, focusing and expanding a person's existing blind spots until they lose sight of the ground beneath them. If you don't recognize when your own options are narrowing, history eventually does the work for you.